this webinar was requested from folks who probably had joined us for other webinars and wanted a better sort of overview of getting started with Color Efex Pro. So that's what we're going to be doing today. For about the next 45 minutes, we're going to cover these 5 major points. So accessing the software from DxO, PhotoLab, from Photoshop, and from Lightroom. Although we're going to look at DxO PhotoLab first. I'm going to jump over into Lightroom, and then we'll finish with Photoshop. So, and then we'll talk about the non-destructive workflow capabilities, the new tools within the Lightroom and PhotoLab versions of Color Efex Pro and the Nik Collection for that matter. We will do a basic interface overview. And so what we'll do here is I'll go over the basic interface from the left to the right. And then when we're hitting upon the different tools and parts of the palettes, I'll go a little bit more in depth, and I will try to give reminders of where these different parts of the interface are so that you can get a good feel for how the software is working. We're going to talk about control points, which are one of the most important parts of the Nik Collection. Although you don't have to use them, they give you 10 times more power over just adjusting an image globally using the different tools within Color Efex. And then we'll finish off with just taking a look at the website, basically the DxO Nik software website, and where you can find some more educational resources. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of our image here. And we're going to start our image processing. I'm going to hide the left side of the interface here so I can give it a little bit more interface space for our image. But the first thing we've got to do is access the Nik Collection. Again, today we're going to be talking about Color Efex Pro, which is a collection of 55 individual filters that you can combine together to do all sorts of different kinds of things. So before I would move into Color Efex, I would actually utilize my raw processing tools first. So in this case, I'm not going to do much, but I'm just going to warm the image a little bit because I think that the inherent color temperature was just a little bit cool. But if you wanted to sort of set up your image, or if you had a particular set of tools that you used, or needed to make some corrections to exposure or color or contrast and so on, I suggest doing what you can in the raw processing portion of your workflow, and then utilize the Nik Collection sort of after you've tapped out, or you don't want to or need to do anything else to your raw captures. So let's say we're ready to go into the Nik Collection. To access the software from PhotoLab 3, you move into the lower right corner of the interface here where it says Nik Collection. And you simply click on this button, and a little plugin selector launches and gives us access to the different tools. So it's going to be laid out in alphabetical order. And then at the bottom, you have a settings prompt as well, which if we've got any questions in regards to that, we can cover those at the end. But we're going to go ahead and just open up Color Efex Pro 4 by clicking on the Color Efex Pro 4 button. What's going to happen when launching from PhotoLab or from Lightroom is that the software is going to take our raw file and process it into a TIFF file by default. So now we're actually launching a TIFF file into Color Efex Pro 4, and this dialog box is going to come up. Once you know what this says, by the way, in fact, there's a few of these kinds of prompts that can come up from the Nik Collection. Once you understand what the action is that's happening, you can click the Do Not Show Again checkbox, and then it's not going to show up anymore. I leave these prompts on because I do so many of these webinars, and I want people to know what's happening. So what this is telling us is that because we're working with that TIFF file, we can work in a non-destructive process, which means anything that we do here within Color Efex Pro 4, we can undo, / we can open it up again and reprocess the image however we kind of need to or want to. So, and that's what this prompt is telling you. You just have to enable this option by first clicking the OK button so that we get out of this prompt. So I'm going to click OK. And then the second thing that you need to do to actually turn on that non-destructive process is to click on the little checkbox that's in the lower right corner where it says Save and Edit Later. If that checkbox is on, it means that we're going to get basically the ability to reprocess the image without going too far down that road. Okay, so we're here within Color Efex Pro 4, and we already have a curve adjustment basically on the image. The reason this filter is applied to the image is because the last time I opened up Color Efex Pro, I used this filter with these settings. So this is a sort of sticky. The software remembers the last filter. Sorry, the software remembers the first filter the last time you used Color Efex. So this was my first filter in my filter stack. We're not going to worry about this, but that's why the software opened up this way. If you've never launched Color Efex before, the software will actually launch into the black and white conversion filter. So if you follow me over to the left side of the interface, let's kind of play this like we've never opened the software before. So if you've never done it before, it's going to open into the black and white conversion software, or sorry, filter, and you will be in what's called the single image view. Right now we're in a split preview. I'm going to tell you all about that. But for now, I'm going to click on the single image view, and we can see our black and white conversion filter applied to the image. So, before we move any further, whether you launch the software from Photoshop or Lightroom or Aperture or PhotoLab, I don't know, Aperture probably, there's probably not many users anymore and it's not really supported, but from PhotoLab, Photoshop, or Lightroom, the software is going to look almost exactly the same. And so if you're a Photoshop user and you're saying, well, I don't use PhotoLab, that's okay. We're here in Color Efex and it's going to work exactly the same way. There's only two little differences, which I'll point out. Okay, so we're here within the black and white conversion filter. We got there because I clicked on it on the list on the left side. So you know what? Let's just start with the filter library on the left side of the interface. First of all, in the upper left corner in the filter library, we have a list of all of our filters, and right now we are on all of them. I think mine have been augmented, so you can actually change these little organizational options here. So right now the all is on, but if I click on nature, these are the filters that are suggested for nature photography. Your 8 options, 7 of them might be slightly different because these are not the defaults. And like I said, you can change this, but I just want to point that out if anybody's got Color Efex open, and that might be confusing. Anyways, these are different ways of organizing the filters, right? So here are the portrait filters, or filters that work well for portrait photography. If I click on architecture, we get a different filter list. And it's just broken up into the filters that work well for architectural photography. We're going to stick with the all for now, because I know everybody's got it. So let's just run with it. So we're on the black and white conversion filter right now. But if I were to go and click on a different filter, let's say like one of my favorite filters, the dark and light and center filter. So we scroll over it in the filter list on the left side and just click on it. What'll happen when we click on this is it will actually replace the black and white conversion filter that you see on the right side. So let's do that. Let's click on dark and light and center. As soon as that happens, the dark and light and center filter tools palette pops up so we can adjust the filter and how it's working. And also, we're no longer applying the black and white conversion filter because I just clicked on a different filter within our filter list. Now, we're going to come back to the filter list. Oops. We're going to come back to the filter list here. But before we dive into the filter list itself, I want to show you what this filter is doing, and I want to show you how to look at the before and after of a filter. So one thing I do want to do is move over into the border luminosity. So my adjustment slider in the filter itself, I'm just going to go ahead and darken the edge down, so it's easy to see our before and after. We'll get into these, but for now, follow my cursor into the sort of top left quadrant of the interface, and we're in the single image view. And if I wanted to see the image without any of the filters, in this case, the one filter applied to the image, we can click and hold the compare button, and you're gonna see the before. So there's the before darken, lighten, center, and if I let go, you'll see the after. And voila. So this filter, it's a very sort of easy to use filter that basically gives us the sense of relighting the image. We're darkening the border in this case and lightening the center in a way that's really quite subtle, but very effective for directing the viewer's attention towards the center or towards the subject, because you can actually place the center point of the filter. But anyways, we're talking about the single image view. And as I press and hold the compare button, you see the before. As I let go, you see the after. The two other views that you have here within Colorfx is a split preview. So what you're seeing when we click on the split preview is on the left side of this red line is the original image, and on the right side of that red line is the enhanced image. It's the photo that has the darken, light, center, or whatever filters you're using. If you click on that little red line, you can actually drag it back and forth, and this can be very handy to see like the minutia, the difference between certain parts of the image and how these filters are being applied. It's probably not a big deal with darken, light, and center, but if you start using other filters like detail extractor or film effects and these other tools, oftentimes this is a good way of looking at your filter application, you know, where the adjustments are and what they look like compared to before when nothing. So with the split preview, you can even rotate that. So right now we're splitting it vertically and we're dragging this back and forth so that we can see a horizontal representation of our before and after. But if you click on the twirler, this little arrow that's on the top portion of the bar, now you can see on top is the original and on the bottom is the enhanced, and you can actually just drag that up and down. So it's a nice way of controlling the before and after. The third and final preview that you have is a side-by-side preview. And right now when I click on it, we get a top and bottom preview, but on top is the original, on the bottom is the enhanced. And if you click on the twirler here, now you'll see on the left is the original and on the right is the enhanced. Now, there are more interface things that we'll talk about because I want to show you how you can make this more usable. But for now, this is the side-by-side preview. I'm going to go back into our single image view. And you know what? Let's click on a different filter. We're going to replace darken, light, and center by scrolling into our filter list. And we're going to click on Pro Contrast. It's a really phenomenal filter. It's a easy to use filter, and it's one that I find myself using very commonly, very often on lots and lots of pictures. So Pro Contrast, you'll note it's starred because it's one of my favorite filters. We're going to talk more about that too, but there's a little star that's to the left of the label. It's been enabled or turned on by clicking on it. I'm on Pro Contrast, and what we're going to do is move into the actual Pro Contrast tool or filter list. Sorry. Adjustment filter. Wow, I can't speak at all today, apparently. So the Pro Contrast filter is very easy to adjust. It has 3 sliders, and it basically allows you to correct the color casts, which I think we already did when I had adjusted the color temperature initially when we were within PhotoLab. And then we've got a correct contrast and a dynamic contrast filter or slider. So correct contrast, as I turn that on, I'm going to go ahead and just slide it all the way over to 100. It's going to attempt to look at this image based upon the histogram and the tones within the image, correct the overall contrast in the photo. Rarely will I slide this slider and leave it all the way over at 100, but it's a good thing to do with any of these tools, just to go ahead and just turn them all the way on, see what it does, and then start backing it off until you get to a point that's maybe effective for your image. So in this case, the correct contrast slider at 44% looks pretty nice. I'm going to go ahead and increase the dynamic contrast. This is a part of this tool that is proprietary to Colorfx. There's a few filters inside of this software that have very specific algorithms that are only built into Colorfx. Dynamic contrast is one of them. And the beauty of this is that It's a separate or a different way of applying contrast based upon how the software looks at the image, looks at the tones within the image, and then as you increase the dynamic contrast slider, it will basically look at this photo and increase contrast in certain tone areas, that is certain brightness areas. And it's automatic. All you got to do is decide how much of it you want. And this can be a really nice way to increase the contrast and make it look different than, let's say, like a standard contrast slider, or even without making super intricate curves. So the beauty of this filter is that it gives you lots and lots of control, but it's just 3 sliders, and we can create an image that has a lot more sort of pop or depth to it. In fact, if we click on our compare button in the top toolbar, we'll look at the original image. Because it was a raw file that I hadn't made any contrast adjustments to, it was relatively flat. You couldn't see a lot of depth or pop, if you will. And as I let go of the compare button using just the Pro Contrast filter, I think my application is a little bit too strong right now, but you can see a pretty dramatic difference between the before and the after. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull these sliders down a little bit to make my adjustment a little more subtle. And then from there, what we're going to do is just add another filter to our filter stack, right? So right now we're using this Pro Contrast filter. And if we were ecstatic with the image and we don't need to apply anything else, we could just click the Save button in the lower right corner of the interface and apply the adjustment. But rather than doing that, I want to show you how to add multiple filters so that you can start to create your own recipes or your own combination of filters that you like and work well together. So Pro Contrast is a good filter to start with. I'm going to go ahead and click the Add Filter button. That's right underneath our active filter. And when I do that, you see it sort of closes up the Pro Contrast filter, and it allows us to now move back into the filter list on the left side and click on a new filter. So when I click on this new filter, let's say we go back to Darken, Lighten, Center, actually apply it. Now, when I click on it, we've got our Pro Contrast filter, and in our filter stack, we have Darken, Lighten, Center, right? And so this is an easy way of basically combining multiple filters together so that you can get the exact look that you want. And in this case, we're correcting the contrast with Pro Contrast, and then I'm redirecting your eye as the viewer using Darken, Lighten, Center. So this is a smart, I think, combination of filters to use. If we wanted to see the before and after, we could of course go to the compare button and just click the before and the after, right? Or since now we have 2 filters applied, or if we had 3 or 4 or 5 filters in our stack, if we wanted to turn one of the filters off so that we could see what the image looked like before, you can just click on the little checkbox that's to the left of the filter label itself. So to see Darken, Lighten, Center off and then on again, I can click that off. And then if I click it back on, you'll see the application of the filter again. So this is just Pro Contrast and Darken, Lighten, Center. In fact, to kind of cover this filter, there are 2 different shapes. Well, first of all, I'm going to adjust the sliders a little bit so that it's easier to see the effect. We're not going to leave the sliders at this extreme adjustment, but by taking the center luminosity all the way up and the border luminosity all the way down, it's easy to see what's happening as we change these things. So I'm going to click on the shape pop-up or drop-down. There are 2 shapes here within the Darken, Lighten, Center filter. You have a circle or an oval, right? And it's easier to see this on your own image than when we're streaming this via the internet. But if you scroll over it, you'll actually see the application, sort of the vignetting or the application of this filter change in terms of where the center and the shape of the center is compared to the border. So you can choose your shape. You've got your brightness levels of center and border. We've adjusted those. And then you have center size. So by decreasing the center size, now we only have a very small area in the middle of the image that's going to be affected by the center luminosity slider, right? Most of the image is now going to be affected by the border luminosity slider because the center size has been made so small. And I wish there was a better visualization of that for you, but all we can do is sort of show you instead of, there's nothing on the image that you can really see. If I take the center size slider and I bring it all the way to 100, now most of the image is being lightened up because we've increased the size of the center, right? And so only the very far corners are actually being darkened down with that center size. So the default setting of 55 works really nicely in a lot of situations, but know that you can make the center smaller or bigger. Another thing that you can do, in this case, the center of the image is kind of the focal point of the photograph anyways, but in a lot of images, you'll want to replace the center for this filter. So what you would do is click on that place center button, and then your cursor is going to turn into a little crosshair, and watch what happens if I click on the upper right corner of the interface. Now I've replaced the center. It actually seems like now there's light coming from, camera right up here instead of the center of the image. So it's another way of thinking about using this filter. You don't always have to put the center, in the center of the image or even on the center of the subject matter of the picture. So this is a nice creative filter because of that. Now, for what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and make our border luminosity a little more subtle and the center luminosity a little bit more subtle as well. I don't really want to increase the brightness of the center all that much. I do want to darken down the border a little bit. But now we've gone over Pro Contrast and Darken, Lighten, Center. Why don't we go ahead and just apply these two filters to our image, and that's going to basically bring us back over into PhotoLab. So actually, one last step. Before I ever click the Save button, I always do one last check with the compare or with a split preview or side-by-side preview to make sure that I'm getting what I want, right? So that I've got the exact application the way that we want. Now, the beauty of making sure that this little checkbox is on is that even if we don't get exactly what we want, we can come back in and reprocess the image if we wanted to. But for now, I like what we're getting, so let's go ahead and save our filter or stack. So I'm going to click Save, and Color Efex Pro is going to apply those adjustments to our duplicated TIFF file. So it brings us back over into our host piece of software. And now if we look at the before and after, we've got our raw file. Let me just zoom out once. There we go. And we have our enhanced file using Color Efex Pro. And accessing the software, in this case, from PhotoLab. So let's go ahead and jump over into Lightroom, and I'll show you how to launch the software from Lightroom. Because the software is going to work the same way for the most part. The difference is just accessing the software from Lightroom or Photoshop or PhotoLab. So we're here in Lightroom's develop module, and like I said before, you'd want to make some adjustments to your raw file before going into the Nik collection. You don't have to, it's just that's typically a better or smarter workflow because of the parametric, because of the way that these pieces of software work, basically. Without going too far down that line. All right, so let's say we've prepared our image and we want to bring it into Color Efex. You can do this either from the develop module or the library module. You don't have to be in the develop module, but the simplest way in my mind to access the Nik collection is to right click on your image. And then you go to the edit in dialog, and any of the Nik collection that you've got are going to be listed out, again, in alphabetical order. So we're going to click on Color Efex Pro 4. So again, just to recap, develop module or the library module, right click, go to edit in, and then from edit in, you'll have your list of the different presets, or not presets, filters, tools, external editors that work within the edit in dialog. So we'll click on Color Efex Pro 4. This part looks a little bit different than it did within PhotoLab, but basically this is Lightroom asking whether we want to make a copy or we want to edit the original. Because we're dealing with a raw file, it's going to make us edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and that's good. We want to do that anyways. It's going to make it an extra file for us, which isn't necessarily perfect, but it is nice because now we'll have a separate file from our original RAW. Now, when I initially clicked on it, the copy file options were open. And I'll just cover this really quickly as well. First things first, you've got file formats, and using the Nik Collection for best possible results, I would suggest using TIFFs. So click on your file format TIFF. That would be the default, I think, for Lightroom anyways. You've got your color spaces. In this case, we're just streaming via the web, so sRGB is just fine. So we'll leave it there. Bit depth, for best results, I'm going to suggest using a 16-bit per channel setting here. You could use 8 bits, but then you're losing a lot of information that could be useful. So 16-bit file is going to be bigger in terms of on your hard drive itself, but it's better for doing post-processing the way we are. And then resolution actually doesn't matter in this case for us, but you might think about the resolution based upon how you're going to, let's say, maybe print the photograph, or if you're just using the image for the web or some combination, you think about that ahead of time. 240 is fine for what we're doing. So we're going to click Edit. From there, Lightroom makes a copy of our image and it loads into Color Efex Pro 4. And what you'll notice is that it looks exactly the same. And we even get this same prompt again, saying that if you've got that little checkbox on, you will be able to process the image afterwards. I'll actually show you how to do that when we're done here in Lightroom as well. Okay, so I'm going to click the OK button. So note this, the Pro Contrast filter, which was the first filter that we used in the last stack, is what's being applied here. So, again, just to reiterate that, it's sticky. It remembers it. So let's talk a little bit more about the interface now. In this case, I want to use the detail extractor filter. So I'll go ahead and just click on the detail extractor filter, and that's going to load the filter for us. A couple things in the filter list to cover that we haven't yet talked about. Some of these have a little highlighted star, this little gold star. Those are my favorite filters, right? And so by clicking on that little star, like let's say I do like Glamour Glow. Let's say I wanted to add Glamour Glow to my favorites list. If I click on the little star that's to the left, it's highlighted in gold. And then here within Lightroom, you can access your favorite filters by clicking on favorites. So, I like to use all of the filters whenever possible, whenever appropriate for whatever images, but my favorited filters are the ones that I use most often. So oftentimes, especially if I'm in a hurry and I'm not trying to just play within Color Efex, I will move into the favorites section here so that I don't have to contend with all 55 filters. I know I'm going to use Pro Contrast, Darken, Lighten, Center, and maybe Brilliance and Warmth, or something like that, some combination or different set of these. But these are my favorite filters. And again, the way that we've gotten to them is by clicking on that little star that's to the left of the filter. Now, we've clicked on the detail extractor filter, and I want to show you one more thing in the filter library, the filter list. So we're going to come back to the detail extractor filter. For now, I'm going to click on Film Effects Modern, because when I click on it and then I show you this next option, I think it's going to give us a little better of a visual representation than if I were to do the same thing within Detail Extractor. And that is, in your filter library on the left side, towards the right side of the filter library or filter list, there's a little stack of what looks like stacks of images, like the 3 images sort of laid on top of each other. If you click on that little stack, this gives you preset settings for this specific filter, right? So right now we are on the default, but if I go and click on Fujichrome, which is another contemporary film, I can click on that and you'll actually see when I click on it, now we're looking at the Fujifilm preset. Or if I go and click on the Kodak Portra preset, you'll actually see the image change. And actually what it's doing is it's changing all of the attributes over in the tools palette. So watch, I'm going to click on Fujichrome. So this says Kodak Portra 160 VC on the right side right now. But if I click on Fujichrome, you'll actually see that name change, Fujichrome Pro Via 100F. And actually this filter is a really interesting filter. It emulates all of these different kinds of, well, contemporary films. So if you are a film shooter or would like to create a look that's similar to film, with your digital images, you can do that really easily using these filters. So I just wanted to show you that option on the left side. And again, what we did, I'm going to click the back button in the upper left corner to get us back to our filter library. This time, let's click on infrared film. So I'm just sort of rifling through these different filters. This filter is supposed to be emulating infrared film, right? And actually, I use this all the time, but at a very subtle set of settings. But anyways, the infrared film filter, if we go and click on that little stack, and now I click on, let's say, color number 3, watch the image change, but also watch the tools on the right side change. So now we're using a different method, and the brightness and the contrast are different. Or if I click on color number 5, now we've got a different method, and light and highlights are different, and our contrast is different, and so on and so forth. Right? And we can go in and control this however we see fit. But anyways, every single filter, whether it's a favorite filter or from the entire list, is going to have some presets like that. And the beauty of those presets, this is a cross-processing filter. The beauty of these presets is that you can see some potential. You can see some different representations of your image without having to click around and experiment necessarily with the sliders and the methods in each filter. You can just see what the image is going to look like on the left side of the interface. So it's a really handy option for getting a good idea of the capability of a filter. All right. So I'm going to click on Detail Extractor. This filter works really swimmingly for situations where you have really dark black details that you need texture in, or bright white details, like a wedding dress. In fact, this is a fantastic filter if you've got wedding images or pictures of people in light clothing where maybe you're losing a little bit of texture or detail. This filter is designed to bring out those textures. So if I zoom in, so follow me into the upper right corner of the interface here. We're going to zoom into 50% by just clicking the zoom button. We have a little navigator that pops up and we can click and drag around there. By the way, with the zoom feature, you can change and click, you can click around into these different zoom percentages by clicking here on the right side of the zoom feature. And you can basically go and say, okay, I want to look at it at 100%, or I want to look at it at 25%. You can go and click through those and set those however you see fit, which is handy to know how to do for sure. So I've zoomed all the way into 100%, and I've done that because I want you to look at the highlights, the brightest values within some of the metal, rusted metal here. So I'm going to turn off the Detail Extractor filter so you can get a sense of what's happening. So there's the before. This is without Detail Extractor. And there's the after. So it's kind of flattening the image out, and it's also we're losing some of like the dynamic feel of what the lighting is doing, because this is a photograph by my friend David Turner. He's using one single light to illuminate this. I think it's part of an old clutch, and I don't want to sort of ruin the dynamic feel of the light. And right now, my Detail Extractor filter is kind of doing that. But what I do want to do is see if I can get a little bit more texture in some of these dark areas. So we're going to apply this Detail Extractor filter selectively into particular areas of the image. So far, what we've done is we've only applied stuff globally. We've applied it to the entire image. So here, by using what's called control points, so if you follow my cursor here, control points are going to allow us to apply this filter in specific areas of the image. Whereas if we don't use control points, your filter is going to be applied to the entire photograph. In some situations, that's what you want. In other situations, you want to selectively place the filter in certain areas. So to do that, if you only want the filter applied into, let's say, one or a few small areas, what you would do is start with this plus control point. In fact, you know what we're going to do? I'm going to just increase my Detail Extractor a lot, way more than we'd ever want. But we're going to do that so you can get a sense of what this tool is doing. I'm going to increase the contrast a little too. So my plus control point here allows me to go into an area or an object in the image and apply this filter just to that section of the image, right? So if I wanted the filter to be applied to, let's say the rubber area here, I could place my plus control point on the rubber and it's going to apply the filter wherever we've placed that point. In fact, I'll show you this with another image as well. But basically, if we go and stick this control point, on this area, the point actually recognizes what we're placing it on and will apply this filter only where we want it to be. So I'm going to zoom out for just a second. So the shortcut for that is to hit the space bar on your keyboard. Zooms out to full screen. I placed my control point right there in the sort of rusted area, sort of a brighter section of the rusted area. And what's happening is we're only applying the filter to that section. The detail extractor filter has been removed from everything else. And I know that because I started this with the plus control point. So watch this. If I delete the point by just hitting the delete key on my keyboard, gets rid of it. Now the detail extractor filter is being applied globally to the whole picture. We don't want that. So we take a plus control point, we place it on the object or area in the image that we want the filtered effect, and now we've got the filtered effect only where the control point is selecting. Now, one would think that it's making a circular selection, but it's not. It's making a selection inside of that circle, right? Because there's a little circle going around the point itself. What the control point's doing is it's looking for the object that you placed the point on, and it's doing that by looking at the tone, color, and texture, among a couple other things. It looks for edges and the tonal values to figure out exactly what it should be selecting. And because this is a plus control point, it's putting the effect in only where we've placed the point. So let's look at that one. If I click on the words control points here, this is going to open up into a control points list. And we only have one control point on the image right now, but if we had more than one, it would be listed out here. And if you want to see what the control point is actually selecting / applying the filter to, you click on this little box, this little square on the right side of the filter list, control points list. And when you click on that, it's going to enable a mask. And basically this mask is a live preview of what the filter is doing, or where the filter is applying the adjustment, right? And what you're seeing is anything that's white has the application of the filter. Anything that's black does not have the application of the filter. And then anything that's gray has some of the filter applied. The lighter the gray, the more the filter is affecting. If you click on that control point and drag it around, you can get an instant feedback. You know exactly what's being adjusted wherever you place that point. In this case, the image is, it's a circular object. It's actually probably not an ideal image to show for showing you how these control points are making their selections, but it does do a nice job to pick out just this area. And then for those of you who are familiar with brushes or selection tools within Photoshop, this is a very different way of approaching a selection. And what's happening here is that we're able to select out whatever the object is that we place the point on, and then it creates a photographic looking selection. So if the filter or if the control point is being applied in an area that we're not sure if we want it, it still looks good, right? If you were to use something like a lasso tool or a quick select or select subject within Photoshop, these are selective tools that you can use to call out areas within Photoshop. If you mess up the selection, it's noticeable and it doesn't look good because you're literally cutting things out. The beauty of these control points is that they are going to create a photographic looking selection. So the adjustment then is applied in a way that looks photographic, and therefore it looks natural. So if it is applying in an area where you don't want it to be, like let's say this plus control point is applying, out here in the outskirts of the image, and we don't want it to be, what you can do is just take minus control points and place the minus point in the area or on the object where you don't want the filter applied, right? And so as I add control points, each control point kind of gets smarter, right? Each control point kind of recognizes better what it should be applying the filter to and what it shouldn't be. So now our 1+ control point is much smarter, and it makes a much better selection just in this area of the image. In fact, let's go ahead and turn off our filter list. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on this little checkbox to the right, and I'm going to save this because I want to talk a little bit more about control points, and I need to do this on probably a different image. So we're going to click Save, and we're going to jump over into Photoshop. And the reason we're going to do that is because I have an image that I think is going to be a little bit better for explaining control points. So we'll jump over into Photoshop. I'll show you how to access the software, and then we'll kind of run from there. So I've got this photograph where we've already processed it within Adobe Camera Raw, and now I'm ready to apply Color Efex to it. So there are two ways to access the Nik Collection from from Photoshop. What am I doing? From Photoshop. We click on the filter drop-down menu, go to the Nik Collection, and then you'll see them listed out in alphabetical order here in the filter sort of drop-down. But in my mind, there's actually a better way of accessing the Nik Collection from Photoshop. And there's this, it's actually a handy dandy new way of doing this with a better sort of interface, and that is called the Nik Selective Tool. So the Nik Selective Tool, I'll show you this twice because my Nik Selective Tool isn't open. I've got to go open it up by going to the File drop-down menu, Automate, and then the Nik Selective Tool. But this is the way that we access the Nik Collection from Photoshop. Again, there are two ways, but this is the way that I do it because it's convenient and it's nice. And it actually houses, so in the Nik Selective Tool, this little dialog box, prompt window, we have our favorited filters and our favorited recipes. So this is another way of accessing those filters directly. So if I wanted to use, let's say, cross-processing on this image, I can go ahead into my Nik Selective Tool and just click on cross-processing, and the software is going to open directly into the cross-processing filter. I'm gonna hold off on that. I'm actually going to close the Nik Selective Tool so you can see how to reopen it, just in case. So if you missed that, because I hadn't told you what the Nik Selective Tool was at the time, what you would do is go to the File drop-down menu, and to open the Nik Selective Tool, you go to Automate, and then click on the Nik Selective Tool. When you click on it, it should basically instantly pop up, and now we can access our different Nik tools as well as our favorited filters within Color Efex Pro. So I'm going to click on cross-processing. The software is going to launch. It looks exactly the same as it did before, except now we actually have a brush button in the lower right corner, which will allow us to brush the filter effect in where we want it to be. So we can use control points while we're here within Color Efex Pro, and then we can either click the OK button, and the OK button is going to apply those filters, or when you're done with all of your filters, you can click the brush button. It's going to apply the filters, but then it's going to prompt you with a brush tool. So you can brush the effect in exactly where you want it to be. All right, cross-processing. So actually, this is one of my favorite filters. But before we just dive into this one, I want to show you a couple more things in the interface. So we've covered a lot of the filter library on the left side, and I know there's a lot to talk about. I'm sorry if I've already overwhelmed folks. It's 1:46 already. There's so much more to talk about. We've got our filter library. We know how to apply filters. We've gotten a start into utilizing control points, but there's another option for applying filters, and it's called a recipe, which is generally a grouping of filters, and there's a bunch of them that are built into the software, and then you can create your own filter stack and save it as a recipe. So let's click on recipes in the lower left corner here. These are my custom recipes. So I'm going to click the back button, and this is going to bring us into sort of the general recipe dialog or menu. And I've got 47 recipes built in right now, or in my software, and that's because I've 26 of them I've just made, right? A bunch of them I've created. When the first time you ever launch the software, if you haven't saved your own recipes, you'll have 10 sample recipes and then 10 en vogue recipes. If I click on the en vogue recipes, you can actually see sort of instantaneous representation of what would happen to the image if you click on that particular recipe. So let's click on some different ones. So we click on contrast in black and white. As soon as I do that, the software says, oh, well, adding a recipe is going to replace any of the stuff that you've done on the right side. So it's a warning. So if you've done some stuff and you don't want to lose it, you'd want to click the no button. But in this case, we want to apply the contrast in black and white recipe. So I'm going to click yes. And now our last filter disappeared and we have black and white conversion, dark contrast, and tonal contrast. And basically that's the preset. That's the recipe that's built into the en vogue section here. I'm going to click on lavender. I get this warning every single time. Again, when you recognize what's going to happen when you click on these different things, just click the do not show again, and then you're not going to have to deal with that every single time. So this is lavender, and that's using Film Effects Nostalgic and the detail extractor. And if we click on Super Punch, it's going to give us that warning again. And now we're going to be using Bleach Bypass, Contrast Only, and Pro Contrast, right? And these recipes are just a nice starting point for you, because what you would then do once you've got the recipe or you've clicked on it is you'd move into the tool like Bleach Bypass and you would adjust it. So let's say I actually wanted more saturation. I could reintroduce some saturation into our image by taking that saturation slider up. We could go into the contrast only filter and augment this tool. So you don't have to leave the presets, the recipes as is. You click on them as starting points. So in this case, let's say I really like what's going on, but I want to actually flatten the image out. So I don't want that really kind of interesting contrast that we had before. I want this to have a sort of flat overall look to it. So I'm going to decrease the contrast. I'm going to actually increase the soft contrast a little bit. And let's say we love this new combination, right? And we want to save this. So the next time we want to use this, well, it was Super Punch, but the next time we want to use this filter stack, we have our own custom recipe that does the thing that we want it to do. So what you would do is click on the Save Recipe button in the lower right corner of this portion of the interface. And so what I'll do is I'm actually going to reduce the contrast a little bit more, just to make it a little bit more obvious. I'm going to click Save Recipe, and I'm going to call this Flattened Contrast. Cool. As I click the OK button, watch what happens on the left side of the interface, because we're creating our own filter stack now. We're creating our own recipe. So I'll click the OK button, and now in my custom section, so these are the ones that I've created myself, you're going to find that new recipe, the flattened contrast recipe. If you wanted to make a recipe, your own recipe from scratch, you would do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to close these, and I'm just really quickly going to add in a couple different filters. So I'll add cross-processing, click the Add Filter button. I'll click on Film Effects Nostalgic. Maybe I'll adjust the vignette so it's a little more subtle. Warm the image or cool the image down. And then click the Add Filter button. And I'm really just playing here. Let's add Glamour Glow and increase the amount of glow. And then bring the shadows back down. Okay, so let's say we love this effect, combining cross-processing vintage, Film Effects Vintage and Glamour Glow. And the way that we've done this, I want to save this as a recipe. I just click the Save Recipe button. Now I'm going to call this, oops, sorry, I punched the microphone. That's not going to work for us. I'm going to call this Dark Glow 2, because I think I already have a Dark Glow 1. And then I'm going to click the OK button. And now we have our brand new recipe that we just created, which should be somewhere in here, probably at the bottom. Yep, Dark Glow 2. anyways, that's how you'd create a recipe. It's an important feature in the software, so I wanted to make sure that we covered it because we weren't able to cover absolutely everything in the interface. In fact, before we move into questions, I'm going to click on the history browser. It's the last thing on the left side of the interface that we have not talked about, right? So to close this or to open up the filter library, I just click on filter library because this is our filter list back. If I click on recipes, our recipes are going to pop up. And then if I click on history, the history browser pops up. And what we're looking at here is the history of all the things that we've done to the image while in Color Efex Pro. And this is nice because we can go back, we can step back to a previous state by just clicking on that previous state. Or we could actually compare this version with a previous version in our editing process. So you can do that. This is a cool trick. And it's a nice little feature here. If you click the compare button while the history browser is open, watch. You see the before and you see the after. Now, the after, so where we are right now, is whatever's highlighted in the history browser. The before can be changed, because right now when I click and hold the compare button, you see the original image. As I let go, you see where we are right now. If you click on this part of the browser and you drag that into a different section or a different time in our processing, you can actually now view the before and after from that state to where we are now. So this is a nice way of being able to kind of view the kind of play or the things that you've done to the image so far. Hey, Lori,
Yes.
Are there any questions? I'm going to go ahead and bring up the website so folks can find more educational stuff here. But were there any questions that came in that I can answer?
We have just a couple questions for you.
Okay. Let me mention this really quickly and then we'll go into the Q&A. Sorry to bring you up early. I just realized I wanted to talk to you about this as well. So there's a few ways of accessing these webinars. If you're a Photoshop user, there's actually a little news prompt that'll pop up in the Nik Selective Tool telling you about upcoming events, which is really cool. But also, if you go to the Nik Collection website, so nikcollection.dxo, I'll just go there. Go to nikcollection.dxo. If you want to find the webinars page, you go to Explore and click on Webinars. And so these are the upcoming webinars that are listed out. And then there's also a whole huge slew of recorded webinars, many that I've done, many that my friend Photo Joseph has done. Other folks have joined, like Vincent Versace and Frank Salas, really fantastic photographers and are super users of this software. They use it in their own way, but they are experts in their own fashion as well. And then beyond the Explore or the webinars, if you go to YouTube, you can see, you go to YouTube and you search DxO Nik Collection, and there's actually an official page that has hundreds of videos on it, that both long form and then short sort of tutorials. And finally, there is in the Explore tab all sorts of stuff, but I want to click on customer support, because in the customer support section, everything you need to know about all of the individual pieces of software are in here. So if we go to Color Efex Pro and we want to get a tour of the Color Efex Pro 4 interface, you just scroll into it, click on that interface, and you can view the page. And this is going to walk us through the Color Efex interface. Basically, all the stuff that we talked about today, but it's sort of set out into a kind of PDF-looking system. It's pretty nice. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to talk about there, Lori. We'll leave the rest of the time for questions so I can answer.
Okay, great. No, that's great. Couple questions about what do the shadows and highlights sliders do?
Good question. All right, I'm going to jump back over into PhotoLab. So I want to use this image for that. So in some of the filters in Color Efex Pro, there's a highlights slider and a shadows slider. I'm going to click into it. So let's just go Color Efex Pro. We have to find a filter that uses those parameters. And I would say almost any filter that you can apply a contrast change to or a brightness adjustment to, you're going to see these blacks and highlights sliders that we're going to be referring to once this opens up. Okay, filter library. Let's go cross-processing because that tool has it. So I click on cross-processing. Oh man. And let's click on, I like what this one's doing, L03. I'm going to increase L03. And what's happening with this L03 filter with cross-processing is it's emulating what would happen with the cross-processing sort of filtration in film photography, which is what you can do within a chemical process, skipping certain things. Anyways, long story short, cross-processing, a highlight slider. If I slide this slider to the right, what the software is going to do is it's going to attempt to push the highlights, the brightest values in the image, to the left in the histogram. It's going to try and darken those tones down, because when we're controlling contrast, oftentimes we can lose highlight detail or shadow detail. So the highlight slider pushes your brightest values from the right side of the histogram towards the left. And the shadows slider, which this is not a good image to show necessarily, you can kind of see it in her dress and some of the darkest details here. The shadows slider, as you slide that to the right, it's going to take the shadows and brighten them up. And the idea is, if you've made like a heavy contrast adjustment, let's use Pro Contrast for this image. If we've made a heavy contrast adjustment like this, and maybe that's too far, you can take your highlights and your shadows slider to get that detail back, right? And it's easier to see if we zoom in to the tree and we take this slider to the right. So right now with all this contrast, you lose some of the shadow detail. As you slide it to the right, we can get it all back. The thing is if I take it too far, it's going to look kind of gray and a little bit muddy, but it's a nice feature. It's built into any of those filters that are, that primarily or for the most part will control contrast or brightness values. Cool.
Okay, next question. How to duplicate control points?
Great question. All right, so I like what's happening here on this image for the most part with this contrast adjustment, except I don't really want the effect as strong in the corners because the lens that I had shot with had a vignette and apparently I did not correct that in my post-processing. So I'm going to remove what's happening in the corners with Pro Contrast by taking minus control points and placing them in the lower right and the lower left corner. I'm also going to just take a plus control point and stick it in the middle to kind of make sure that these minus control points aren't affecting into here. Let's take a quick look at the before and after. So there's the before, there's the after. Okay, I love it. So let's say I want to do a new contrast adjustment, and we're going to use a different filter for that because sometimes it can be interesting to apply multiple filters that control contrast, or several filters that are going to affect color in some way. So in this case, I'm going to use Bleach Bypass because it's going to be obvious when I click on it what's happening, right? It's transforming the image dramatically. I'm not saying we should use this image or this filter with this image. I just want to show you what's happening. So let's say I love what's happening, but I don't want the Bleach Bypass effect in the corners. And I actually just want to duplicate the points, the selection and the points that we've got on this filter, on Pro Contrast, and put it in Bleach Bypass. What we can do is highlight all of these control points. So basically, anywhere on the image, you just click and drag, and this is going to just automatically create this bounding box. So literally click and drag. We drag around all of the control points that we want to duplicate. Once we've dragged around them all, we let go of the mouse, and this activates them, right? So you can see that the control points are active. And to duplicate them, you have to move into the filter itself. So here's the Pro Contrast filter. And there's a little stack, this little like hamburger stack, if you will. When we click on that, we go to copy control points. And then we want to paste them into Bleach Bypass. So I open Bleach Bypass, click on that little same stack. And this time, instead of clicking copy, we click paste. And as soon as I do that, watch what happens to the image. Now, those minus control points in the corner have been applied, and the plus control point has been duplicated up here. Now, You probably wouldn't do that with maybe just 3 control points, but let's say you're using 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 control points on one filter, and you want to duplicate them to another filter so that you can have the exact same application in the same areas. That's the tactic. You would just highlight them all, go to that filter stack, click copy, and then go to the filter you want to apply the filters or the control points to, and click paste. All right.
Be sure to watch Dan's next webinar, which will be coming up on Friday, October 23rd. It's the Advanced Tips and Techniques of Using Colorfx Pro, Part 2. And he'll be going over using the brush feature in Photoshop, deeper into control points, and more about recipes, etc. So we hope you enjoyed this webinar. And Dan, thanks again for a great presentation.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.